what specific supply has been removed from the system across oil, LNG, and fertilizer due to the conflict?
Essentially leaves you around 10 to 12 million barrels a day of oil that cannot be exported through this strait. And that's what we're losing, about 10 to 12% of global demand. Qatar is responsible for about 20% of global LNG supply, and their production is totally shut off. Some of that LNG is actually used for fertilizer production. That's a further impact on fertilizer.
Yeah. How serious is this situation to the US economy? And then where would you say it ranks compared to past geopolitical energy shocks?
It would be comparable to the Russia-Ukraine war, with the potential to be much more serious. Russian oil still flowed. When you look at the Strait of Hormuz being closed, you've actually lost the majority of the output from that region in oil. Later in the end of the second quarter, early third quarter, you see more on the diesel consumers. Diesel's 3 months that you start seeing those impacts. Food probably is more of a 6 to 9 months. You should also expect that your food is going to get significantly more expensive.
Fernando Valle has spent nearly 2 decades analyzing global energy markets, oil supply chains, and the forces that drive commodity prices around the world.
From Citigroup to Bloomberg Intelligence, he covered more than $1 trillion in energy market value, researching everything from crude oil and refining to natural gas and global supply disruptions.
Today, as energy sector head at Hedgeye Risk Management, he studies how geopolitical conflicts, supply shocks, and energy shortages ripple through economies long before most people feel the consequences.
When people talk about the Strait of Hormuz, I've picked up that there's this assumption that if the supply is disrupted, then it's like, oh, we can just build around it.
It's unrealistic. The canal across the UAE is nearly impossible. It's a huge undertaking. It's not trivial to build that kind of canal. And more importantly, it would be a target. Canals are very static. Ships going through a canal aren't moving at the fastest speed.
Why can't UAE just deploy $1 trillion today and then fix the damage?
They just contacted the US Treasury asking for a swap line. They don't have unlimited funds. They are a very wealthy country per capita, but that's also because it's a very small country in population terms. So they can't just deploy that, and they would still need to build whatever solution it is. Why would you rebuild and then just get it bombed again and then have to spend another $1 trillion? For Fujairah, it's mostly for exports there. There's some storage, obviously, as well, as it's an endpoint. But the issue has been, there have been several attacks of Fujairah. There's been talks of the Houthis restarting trouble in Yemen, and that could also limit how much oil can get through out of the Red Sea. You can also go north through the Suez Canal to go to Europe, for example. So it again bypasses some. You're moving the bottleneck down. There are no easy solutions. It's easy to draw a pipeline on a map. It's a lot harder to build it, and it's a lot harder to trust that your neighbor is going to respect everything that you do with your oil.
So I know the US and Iran, they both fired the commercial vessels, and then oil prices jumped when the markets reacted. And so from your perspective, I was wondering, how serious is this situation to the US economy? And then where would you say it ranks compared to past geopolitical energy shocks?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's certainly serious, and it's serious even more so just U.S., but I'd say global economy will have severe repercussions already. Right now, the question is just how long it will last to really measure the harm done to the global economy. But it's already fairly severe, and it would be at least so far comparable to the Russia-Ukraine war, with the potential to be much more serious, because there is a lot more restriction in the products coming out of the Strait of Hormuz than what was coming out of Russia. And then secondarily, it's also we never truly recovered from Russia, and in fact, if anything, consumers got further into debt and nations got further into debt. We had a lot of additional debt spending and leverage put into the system.
I was going to ask, when you said more restrictions, what exactly do you mean by that? Like,
I mean, with Russia, you lost natural gas into Europe.
Okay.
You lost some fertilizers from both Russia and Belarus, which
Mhm.
are very important. But Russian oil still flowed, even with the sanctions, it's still flowing. And then when you look at the Strait of Hormuz being closed, you've actually lost the majority of the output from that region in oil. You've lost liquefied natural gas. Qatar is the second or third, depending on the month, largest exporter of liquefied natural gas in the world. And you lost a lot of fertilizer. Fertilizer is critical. That for a variety of reasons, including sulfur, which is both a crop nutrient but also used in mining and industrial applications.
Um, so it's really, if I'm kind of following you correctly, it was several things. Like, because I guess initially I think about oil being oil affecting, I guess, gas prices the most. Like that's where my mind goes to. My mind doesn't immediately go to like fertilizer and stuff. But it was interesting you said that, because I was thinking about other ways that it affects the economy and that people don't expect. But you kind of, when you're talking about fertilizer and stuff like that. So do you feel like what part of the economy feels I guess the lack of the oil supply first? Would you say it's always the same sector, or does it shift depending on the type of disruption?
Yeah, it definitely will shift depending
Okay.
on disruption. You're seeing right now a very severe impact on airlines, for example, because Arabian oil, both Kuwaiti, Arabian, Iraqi, they all produce a lot more medium distillates. Medium distillates are jet fuel, they're diesel, while U.S. oil produces a propensity of light ends, which are gasoline and naphtha. So you can't substitute them one for one. You're seeing now a bifurcation where gasoline margins are nowhere near as high as diesel margins. The news of shortages are much more on diesel and jet fuel than they are on gasoline. And
And
that's
that,
heavy transportation, that's heating, and that's obviously airlines.
yeah. So, and like you were saying, airlines would feel that. And so for the average person like myself, would you say I would, see a lot more maybe canceled flights, or would you just say the price of my flights are going to skyrocket?
Both. And
Both.
that's
Okay.
the immediate impact because airlines always operate kind of on the limit.
Okay.
They're not exactly cash rich all the time. They have a lot of leverage that they operate.
Mhm.
But in the future, it's also your imports are going to get more expensive, right? A lot of the world's heavy shipping is transported on diesel or fuel oil ships. Your trucks, the trucks that take our food places, that take our
Mhm.
clothes, our Amazon deliveries, a lot
Yeah.
of them are diesel. In the crop harvesting also uses diesel for that, and on top of that, you then have the impacts from the fertilizer. So you should also expect that your food is going to get significantly more expensive, although that's likely 6 to 9 months out.
Okay. So when you say so 6 to 9 months out, and I guess that's kind of like the delayed effect of that, would you say? Is that the correct way to say that?
Yeah, exactly. Because you've already planted a lot of the U.S. has two crop seasons. The
Mhm.
spring season's already planted. You're not going to see the impact of higher fertilizer prices on this particular crop planting season. You will see it slightly on the harvest.
Okay.
But then for the next one, you're going to see the combined effect of both.
Mhm. Um, I know that there's been a pretty significant amount of damage done to the Saudi infrastructure. Um, so I was kind of curious what specific supply has been removed from the system across oil, LNG, and fertilizer due to the conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a good question because when you consider those, consider four main exports from the Strait of Hormuz. The first one everyone talks about is oil,
Hmm.
and then its derivative refined products also goes that way.
Okay.
The next one is natural gas and natural gas liquids like ethane, propane, butane, and the fourth is fertilizer and sulfur. Out of those four, really the only one that can make its way bypass the strait is oil and
Okay.
some very small portion of refined products, because you have things like the East-West pipeline that take oil from the eastern province of Saudi Arabia to Yanbu in the Red Sea. That has a capacity of 7 million barrels a day. Saudi produces 9 million to 10 million barrels a day of oil production. So
That seems
it's
like
a similar amount.
that seems like a massive amount to me. Is that, or would you say that's just like it's normal?
It's a massive amount. It's a huge pipeline, but if you consider that behind the strait is around 20 million barrels a day of production, it's not. It's less than half. When you consider that it's 100 million barrels a day of global production, again, it is a small amount relative to what is the dearth of oil there. Similarly, you have a pipeline in the UAE that can take you to Fujairah in the Gulf of Oman. That's about 1.5 million barrels a day. Essentially, it leaves you around 10 to 12 million barrels a day of oil that cannot be exported through this strait. And that's what we're losing, about 10 to 12% of global demand. Then on natural gas, that's probably the biggest hit. Qatar is responsible for about 20% of global LNG supply. And their production is totally shut off, with 20% of that 20% being hit and lost for 3 to 5 years at least from whenever they start rebuilding.
Wow.
So that's very significant.
Yeah,
Now,
that's going to have a huge impact on, their economy. And then I'm guessing it'll be a trickle down effect for others as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So liquefied natural gas is a small market relative to the global natural gas market, but it's still very impactful, especially to certain economies that rely on it. Europe is one of those. China and some other Southeast Asian countries also rely on natural gas imports, and they're looking for alternatives. The issue with the alternatives is essentially that their price is always also going up, namely coal, namely fuel oil, and then they have different externalities like more pollution, more smog than natural gas, which is a cleaner, better fuel overall. So we're certainly going to see an impact of higher cost, but it will be mitigated by using alternatives on power,
Like-
power generation, like coal, like fuel oil, in some cases renewables. But the challenge will be, again, there's going to be a cost associated with that, especially 3 to 5 years of having that shortfall. And in a world that we're consuming more and more electricity because of electrification, because of artificial intelligence, it's certainly impactful for them. And one last wrinkle on that is that some of that LNG is actually used for fertilizer production. So urea in other parts of the world use natural gas. They reform that. Ammonium nitrate is also uses a lot of natural gas reforming. So that's a further impact on fertilizer.
Yeah. When you learned of the damage on the Saudi side, what were your immediate thoughts on that, or did you have an immediate reaction?
Well, I mean, it's always an immediate reaction of how bad is it?
Yeah.
And so far, there was damage to one of the compressing stations on the East-West pipeline, which was rebuilt very quickly.
Okay.
There's been damage to refineries that are going to take longer. And what it does is essentially create a bigger gap there in that middle distillate area, that diesel and jet fuel. Because
I was going to say, when you say bigger gap, does that mean like a delay in pricing, or?
Well, pricing will stay up for longer.
Okay.
And they'll stay higher. It's always the cure for high prices is high prices, is what we always say in commodities. So consumption is going to go down, right? Your flight to Europe is going to be that much more expensive that you might not fly to Europe, and so the demand is going to come down.
Yeah.
But
that's true, because I know when flights they get ridiculously high, sometimes I'm like, no, I'm not going right now, or I'm like, I'll figure something else out, because sometimes it does deter me when the price, like you said, it skyrockets, and I'm like, I just can't afford this right now.
Well, exactly, and especially in the jet side of the equation, you'll have that. You have airlines canceling because they're saying, "I can't afford to fly you there," and
Yeah.
so they'll cancel those flights. So demand will reflect that, and will bring us closer to balance. But yeah, I think diesel and jet are the biggest hurt here because again, U.S. oil can't plug that gap one for one, and because we've lost about there's 4 million barrels a day of capacity, more or less, in the Gulf behind the Strait. That's not getting out. Some of it is domestic, so it wasn't going to get out anyway. But some of it is very impactful.
Okay. With I think I'm saying this if I'm saying this correctly, the OPEC production with OPEC production, um, I had in my notes that it dropped by 8 million barrels per day, and I was wondering how much of that is realistically recoverable in the short term or near future.
So yeah, so that's that 10 to 12 when you include Iraq, and when you include if you include Iran, that is if we do blockade them.
Okay.
So you have two ways of recoverable, right?
Mhm.
You have today the storage in the Middle East is full, so
Okay.
you can't produce more because you have no place to put it.
Okay. Yeah, there's nowhere for it to go, so they're kind of
Yeah. So and you're measuring that, as you said, 8 million barrels a day. That's 8 million barrels every day. So today, if that production is zero, you're not making that up,
hmm
right?
yeah.
It's a lost day of production. That
Okay.
doesn't mean you can't produce it down the road, but you can't produce it today. You got to produce it tomorrow.
Mm.
So if you do that math in the 45 plus days that we've been at tank tops, you're talking about anywhere between 400 to 500 million barrels of production that's been quote unquote lost. Um, and essentially, you've been using strategic petroleum reserves, commercial reserves to make up for that. Um, Now, it's essentially a bank, right? You went to
Yeah.
the bank to borrow it. You're going to eventually refill that. It smooths out the peak. So if you didn't have that, prices would have spiked even further. And but once the production is back, they would fall very quickly. Now you're going to get the demand to refill those 400 million barrels spread over 6 months, 2 years, depends. But
Okay.
you're going to get additional demand from those reserves to refill.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go
no,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, because I was just thinking, like, I was wondering, I'm like, yeah, man, if that supply doesn't come back quickly, I'm like, what then does that do to the balance between the supply and the demand over, like the course of a few months?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, demand is going to come down. There's almost no way that you don't have what we call demand destruction,
hmm
and but then part of the supply is being made up by the reserves, which is essentially today their supply, tomorrow there'll be demand because they are going to refill, and that's likely you drain a lot faster than you refill. So if you drain in 3 months, you're going to refill it probably in 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah, more or
So
less.
yeah, and I guess that would be because so um when the oil supply tightens meaningfully, so then the chain reaction would be that, like you said, how did you say that? It refills quickly. Am I saying that? Am I?
You draw much faster than you
Yeah.
refill.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I'm kind of picking up what you're putting down. I'm still learning all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, and just with everything going on today, I'm trying to stay informed. Some of it's a little over my head, but that's why it's a really a treat for me to speak to people like you who, you're very well versed in this, and I'm learning, a lot from you, and I know our audience will too, because I think most of us, we see all this crazy stuff going on, and we want to understand, but sometimes it's complicated, and we get these mixed messages in the media, and everything is, it's like life or death and a scare tactic. And I think it is very serious, but sometimes I'm like, I don't know what this means for me. Like, how's this going to affect me when I leave my house today? So,
Well, I think the way to contextualize this is it's a little bit more dire than I'd like to say, but
mhm.
we're lucky in the U.S. that a lot of our demand is um, above our basic needs, right?
Okay.
So we don't have to worry about not having our basic needs. It's really the weaker economies that where their basic needs are barely met, where
Yeah.
that cost becomes prohibitive, they really have a reason for concern here. And it is going to be existential for some of those smaller economies. And you're seeing export bans across some smaller countries in Southeast Asia. It's the geography also matters here, right? Russia
Mhm.
tends to export to Europe, and some
Yeah.
of it actually made its way to the U.S. East Coast. The Middle East exports to Asia. In 75% of the Strait of Hormuz goes to China, India, Pakistan, South
Okay.
Korea, Japan. So those countries tend to be more impacted by that than the U.S. right away. But it is a global market,
Yeah.
so higher prices impact everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody feels it. Yeah. When when people talk about the Strait of Hormuz, I I've picked up that there's this assumption that if the supply is disrupted, then it's like, oh, we can just build around it. But there's, proposals for pipelines, the canals, the land corridors, and together, I guess they would approach hundreds of billions of dollars or even trillions of dollars in infrastructure. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm like, with all, I guess I'm just like, that's fast. It's fascinating. They've got these proposals, but I mean, that's so much money.
Yeah, it's unrealistic. The canal across the UAE is nearly impossible. It's a huge undertaking. It's not trivial to build that kind of canal. And more importantly, it would be a target, right? Canals are very static. Ships going through a canal aren't moving at the fastest speed. So why wouldn't Iran go bomb that canal and close it? Um, Same with pipelines. I mean, they've bombed. It's harder to bomb a pipeline because usually they're underground, but you can bomb the pumping stations. Uh, they haven't done this, but they could bomb desalination. They've done some, but not a ton of desalination plants, which are vital to the Middle Eastern economy. So, bypass is only one part of the problem. Um, that you're solving a small fraction of the issue. The biggest issue is having a militarized Iran that is belligerent at any given point.
And I know one of the things our team was really interested in, like, getting your opinion on is there's these proposed solutions, and we were kind of talking about, well, why can't UAE just deploy $1 trillion today and fix the damage?
Well, they just contacted the U.S. Treasury asking for a swap line. So I think that partially answers your question there is that they don't have unlimited funds. They
Yeah.
are a very wealthy country per capita, but that's also because it's a very small country
Mhm.
in population terms.
Mhm.
They are, there is not, they're very wealthy again, but not endless. So they can't just deploy that. And they would still need to build whatever solution it is. And they would, why would you rebuild and then just get it bombed again and then have to spend another trillion, right?
Yeah.
I guess the bigger question is, would the Gulf the Gulf corridor countries ever join the U.S. and Israel against Iran militarily? And that seems to be a no,
I
despite
was gonna
all of
say, I
them.
don't think so. Yeah, I'm like, I don't think so.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's not in the cards that they're going to spend a ton of money right now to rebuild
Mhm.
until they have more certainty that it's. Remember, this is an existential threat to them if you consider just how much money they're losing from their exports, from the lack of tourism, and from the damages themselves and the defense. This is existential threat to them. So they
Yeah.
can't just go out and commit to a trillion that could then be wasted because Iran attacked again.
Yeah. Um, so we already have systems like Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline and the UAE's. Am I saying this correctly? Habshan Fujairah. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah.
Pipeline. If both of those ran at full capacity, how much of Hormuz's 20 million barrels per day could they realistically replace?
So East West is 7 million, and Fujairah is 1.5 million, so 8.5, and they are pretty much running at full capacity now.
Okay.
So
When
that
you
10 million barrels a day of lost 8 to 10, maybe coming to 12 if you had Iran, is already accounting for that.
Okay. When you look at systems like that, where do the real constraints show up? Is it the moving the oil, or is it actually getting it onto the ships?
It's a good question. Both.
Okay. Yeah.
um, so there's a constraint. It's a funnel at the end of the day. So you're getting 7 million from the eastern province to Yambu, but the King Fahd International Port can only load 4.5 million barrels a day of oil.
Okay.
But you have other uses for that oil there as
Mhm.
well. So it's not that and you have more storage as well in that part. So
Okay.
um, in export terms, you're really gaining 4.5 million barrels a day. And if Vajra, it's mostly for exports there. There's some storage, obviously, as well as it's an endpoint. But the issue has been there have been several attacks of Fujairah, and then that makes its own restrictions on unloading it onto ships. And then lastly, there's been talks of the Houthis restarting trouble in Yemen, and that could also limit how much oil can get through out of the Red Sea for the Saudi.
I,
Uh,
I was I was just gonna ask you, and I'm like, oh well, what if you reroute through Saudi Arabia into the Red Sea, that oil, because that would still pass through Bab el
Pas al
Mandeb,
Mandib.
Bab el Mandeb, yeah, the strait. Would I was gonna ask, would that solve the problem, or just create another shift it to another choke point?
Yeah, I mean, you can also go north through the Suez Canal to go to Europe, for example. So it again bypasses some. You're moving the bottleneck down, which is
Mhm.
in what you would want to do. But yes, Bas el Mandeb can still be a constraint if the Houthis restart. But I think a lot of times we miss this. It's not cheap on Iran, and there were no wealthy nation to begin with, and they armed the Houthis. So the Houthis are less of a priority for arming than their current own needs. So I think there's limited impact that the Houthis can create relative to what they did, 2, 3 years ago.
Um, there's also large scale proposals like the UAE Canal to Fujairah. I say that right?
Mhm.
Yeah, Fujairah. Okay, I'm working on it. And even the Saudi Cross Peninsula Canal to the Red Sea. So even with, say, unlimited funding, are projects like those viable, or are there timelines and any engineering constraints?
Yeah, I mean the Saudi one specifically is very difficult. It's
Okay.
you're going through a very large landmass. You're going through the Haraz mountain range, which is not the tallest mountain range, but pretty extensive.
Yeah.
Um, so it would be very challenging.
Okay.
The UAE, you still have a mountain range there at the border with Oman, and a canal is a very big target, right? It's it's hard to guard. It's a very long, very wide piece of work that
Mhm.
if you close any part of it, you make the whole canal unusable. So
Okay.
if
Yeah.
somebody bombed that, it doesn't create a very easy solution.
Yeah. There's there are some, I guess, well, land-based routes like the Iraq Jordan Aqaba corridor. Did I say that right? Aqaba corridor,
I think so.
that um are being revisited, I guess is what we're reading. Do they reduce the supply gap, or is that more of a stopgap than a solution?
So going north through Turkey has its own restrictions because Turkey itself is not always our closest ally, and so there is a pipeline there already, but it takes only a few 100,000 barrels a day of capacity.
Mhm.
And lest to forget, Iraq is not exactly a area devoid of violence and
Yeah.
struggles, right?
Yeah.
But you still have issues. Iraq is not trying to reestablish its government, and so it's not a totally viable solution. And for Kuwait, for example, that produces 2.5 million barrels a day of oil, if you're going through Iraq, are you just putting yourself in the hands of somebody else? And it gives you more options, but it's not by any means an easy solution
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
cheap.
So it is an option, but probably not the most desirable option.
Yeah, I think right now, again, there are no easy solutions, and it's easy to draw a pipeline on a map. It's a lot harder to build it, and it's a lot harder to trust that your neighbor is going to respect everything that
Yeah.
you do with your oil. So
Yeah. If the supply is disrupted, I think that the default assumption is that, oh, well, other producers can step in and fill the gap. What is U.S. shale, and why can't the U.S. replace supply fast enough on its own?
yeah, so U.S. shale, essentially, we started producing from shales. The what we call the source rock is where oil is formed over millions of years underground,
Okay.
and
Where it
what the
begins,
U.S.
right? Like,
yeah,
yeah. Okay.
what the U.S. really figured out over the past 20 plus years
Mhm.
has been to um, do horizontal drilling. So everyone says fracking, but actually horizontal directional drilling has been one of the biggest things. You drill something like an L
Okay.
underground, and most of your production, or pretty much all your production, comes from the horizontal part of that well.
Mhm.
And you then fracture. Fracking is you fracture the pores within the rock so that oil flows better, and you inject sand, chemicals, water into those pores to blast it open and get more oil flowing out.
It
That's
sounds,
what shale is.
I mean, it sounds complex to me. I'm sure to them, it's like they've got it down to a science.
They do. It's as you said, science. It's all science, geophysical, biochemical, all of those coming together to get a ton of production out, and it's essentially led the U.S., where we were in declining production at around 6-7 million barrels a day of production to now 13.5 million barrels a day of black oil production. Black oil is actual oil, not the condensates and other byproducts. So most of it comes from three basins in the U.S. today.
Okay.
The Permian Basin in West Texas, Southeast New Mexico, the Eagle Ford in West Texas, Southwest Texas, and the
Okay.
Bakken in North Dakota.
Okay.
The Permian is by far the largest of those three. It accounts for over half of U.S. production.
Mhm.
And the challenge of getting more, it's several fold, but the most important is one, we were already coming into a place where every well that we drilled was producing more natural gas than oil in the Permian, more natural gas than oil than it used to produce, rather, I should say. Not
Yeah.
than. So there's higher natural gas content. That's true in the Permian, in the Eagle Ford, and the Bakken. It's something that happens as you want to usually drill you drill your better wells first that have more oil. As you step out, you get more natural gas. So that was already happening. So the returns of oil per well drilled are lower. Second, the industry has gone through a period where it produced so much that it crashed oil prices in 2014, and then prices crash again in 2022,
Mhm.
2023. But they were very much wary of raising capex very quickly and crashing oil prices again. They're focused on delivering free cash flow, delivering returns on capital to their shareholders. So they're not going to just pick up and drill and be their own worst enemy right here. And then the third part is what I mentioned earlier. U.S. oil is very light.
Yeah.
And everyone thinks light's good, and for the most part of history has been. But
Mhm.
the issue is, because we focus on very light, and U.S. shale is very light, we
Yeah.
have a glut of very light oil. and refineries in China, refineries across the globe that were new built, like the Dangote refinery in Nigeria, for example, they focused on processing more medium and heavy sour crudes. So they would be inefficiently run using the light oil side of the equation.
Okay.
And regardless of, you can't make U.S. oil produce more diesel than it inherently can.
Okay.
And so we'll still have that gap on diesel and jet fuel.
Yeah. I was reading that Canada has some of the largest reserves in the world. So why can't the US just increase supply from there?
That's a good question. And we tried. If you may recall Keystone XL, that was
I mean,
very
I
much
remember
a risk.
hearing about it a little bit. I'm not,
Yeah.
well versed, but
So there were at least 3 major pipeline planned out of the Canadian oil sands, which is where most of their reserves are. That's in the Alberta region, Alberta, Saskatchewan. One of them was built, the TMX Trans Mountain Expansion, out to British Columbia. But then the other 2 were canceled. Essentially, Energy East was canceled, and then Keystone XL, which was a pipeline that was going to run parallel to the existing Keystone and then to Patoka, Illinois, was famously the presidential permit was pulled under, I believe Biden ultimately did it. Obama opposed it and Biden ultimately killed it. And that's been one of the main issues, that Canadian oil hasn't been able to grow very significantly over the past decade. They've grown slightly, but it's the costs in Canada are already elevated for a variety of reasons. But at times the discount of their oil to WTI, for example, has been over $30 a barrel. And that's been a mix that it is a very heavy oil. And so the cost to transport them are very high. But then second is that the storage there filled up so much because of that difficulty in transporting it, that the producers are discounting it very heavily. So if we had more pipeline, we could get more of that to fill the gap. But again, it takes 3 to 5 years to build a new project, a brand new project in the oil sands. You wouldn't do it just because oil is currently at 90 without having a signal that you'd be there at a higher price, and that you wouldn't get a huge discount if you flooded the market with oil.
okay. Once the supply tightens, the impact doesn't just stay contained to oil. How does a disruption like this move through the system, you know, into our food, diesel, transportation?
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, every shock is different because it can be a supply shock or it can be a demand shock. And right now we're getting this very unique supply shock, very large, and again, of a kind of oil that we desperately need. So I think that will have very big repercussions for a long time. So we're seeing now on airlines, I think later in the end of the second quarter, early third quarter, you see more on the diesel consumers. And it's not isolated to oil. You have natural gas, you have fertilizer as well. So I think food probably is, more of a 6 to 9 months, diesel's 3 months, that you start seeing those impacts. So, I would look at potentially, if this disruption continues, especially in emerging markets, looking at diesel issues, at economic activity slowdowns because you have restrictions on what's happening with diesel. And then ultimately that impacts we have buffers, right? We've had some of those buffers have been taken away. We're going to see less demand now. And then ultimately less demand for oil means less supply of other goods. So less supply of other goods typically means higher prices. Our macro team expects inflation will be above 30% in the second half of the year.
So one of the things we also wanted to just hit real quick. I know we're about at our time. The economic pressures keep building up, yet the S&P 500 just hit a new all-time high. Um, is that just utter delusion that the market's propped up, or is wartime generally good for the markets?
I think it's a bifurcation of the big stocks, the Mag 8, Mag 7, still moving so strongly versus everything else. So it's a weird situation we find ourselves in, because you have a position where every country wants to win the AI race, and that is what's leading a lot of this valuation. So how do you slow that down? Is it demand? You don't have the typical demand mechanism that I was saying, right? The U.S. government keeps supporting AI, you'll just keep having demand, and you could have this weird dislocation again. Or if you look at the smaller caps, they've been in a recession for a while. The big challenge I see is whether there are job losses as a result of both AI and this disruption, and then that in itself is a concern, because a lot of this cash is passive 401k flows, and we're already at a point where you have more older generations in 401k withdrawals from retirement accounts, and if you get it, that balance gets a little bit more tenuous because you have job losses, that could be a big issue.
Yeah. What would happen in order for the markets to price in this disruption?
That's a good question. I guess to me, it's twofold. I think you'll start to see it in the earnings of the companies. Again, passive-led markets, they're going to need to see actual numbers inflecting. You'll probably see it in some of the earnings calls, because increasingly you have AI analyzing earnings calls for tone and for guidance. So you're going to get a bunch of oil companies that are reporting this week, next week, and thereafter, talking about improved guidance. You're not going to see as big an impact on earnings, especially on the refining side of the equation right away, because again, this happened in March. There are hedges. Sometimes there are inventories that get reevaluated. All of those blunt the impacts in such a short basis. But the second quarter will be very constructive, and I think once you start seeing consensus move, it will all be self-reinforcing, and we're positioned in a way that we think this disruption is a lot longer than folks expect. And even in the moments when it seemed like we were going to get to an agreement and oil went back to $90, it's worth remembering we were at 65. So $90 is a lot better of a price deck for the oil E&Ps than we expected. And our scenario for this year was that demand was really going to struggle because the consumer is stretched thin. And this has made the consumer worse, for sure, but it's taken so much supply that the price, at least for now, is pretty good.
So if this would continue and oil would creep up to, say, $150, what happens in that scenario?
Emerging markets will have a very, very difficult time. And I think consumers in the US and Europe will have a very difficult time. So if we stay at 150 for a really long time, we'll eventually adjust, but not without having to find that cash elsewhere in the global economy, right? I think if you just look at how much energy holds of the S&P 500, we are still very low. That would be a way to rebalance that. The challenge, again, there's only one sector it can really come from. And because the other sectors are also pretty weak. So
Just to kind of like close things out, after everything you've seen in these markets, what concerns you the most about where this goes from here?
To me, it's I mean, depends on what kind of concern. Like I have concerns about just the volatility, the inherent volatility that we're seeing, and what that can do to. There are pools of capital that you can't quite see, and somebody can be offside and then blow up, and then that leads to a whole cascade. So that huge volatility is a concern for me. And then I think civil unrest with if diesel prices remain high, it's a huge concern. And I'm not saying in the U.S., but other parts of the world can be pretty hard. I'm Brazilian by birth. I was in Brazil when we had the trucker strike, the latest trucker strike, because diesel prices got too high, and it's very surprising how fast your supermarket runs out of food after
Yeah.
a trucker strike.
Yeah.
So those kind of things do happen, and they're not pleasant.
Yeah, that is scary, like to think, like you said, the grocery stores aren't getting the trucks to bring the food in, and then people, there's food shortage, they can't eat, and I'm sure things get scary fast.
Yeah, I mean, the government in Brazil capitulated very quickly
Mm.
when that happened, and forced diesel prices down at a loss. And so it tells you it was a very eerie sight to be in a grocery store in Rio with not
Yeah,
bare shelves, but emptier shelves.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine. I know that would freak me out, so I can't even imagine what that was like.
I was there for a wedding, and my friend was very concerned as well for his own wedding.
Yeah, I would imagine that was probably very stressful for him.
Yeah.
I wanted to thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I know I ran a little long. I'm sorry. I wanted to pick
No.
your brain about so many things. I appreciate you so much. I want to make sure we tell our viewers where they can find you at, how they can connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we run an investment research, independent investment research. I focus on the energy sector, everything from utilities to biofuels, obviously oil and gas. You can find me on X at Hedgeye Energy, or you can write sales@hedgeye.com for more info. We do a lot of investment ideas. There are a ton of products that Hedgeye runs. But I think energy is going to be a very interesting spot for the next 10 years. So I encourage everyone to get in touch.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll make sure to like link your stuff so everybody can connect with you easily. And thank you so much. I hope you have a great day.
My pleasure. Thanks, Ariel.
Bye.